Welcome to Skin Deep here on Sirius XM Radio, channel 141 HUR Voices. I am your guest host today, Patrice McNeill. I am sitting in for our lovely host, Sharrarne Morton, who has invited me here to do a four-part series on fashion history. So I am really excited to get into the show today, take you through a quick recap of what we talked about on the first show, and share some information that I think will make all of you fashion history buffs. Stay tuned and we'll be right back after a few commercials. Welcome back to Skin Deep here on Sirius XM Radio. My name is Patrice McNeill. I am your guest host sitting in for Sharrarne Morton, who has invited me here to do a four-part series on fashion history and the impact that cultures have had on fashion over the decades. So, today I'm going to take you back briefly through what we went through on the first episode of the four-part series, and then we'll jump into a few other decades, a few other notables, people that I want to share some information about with you. And let's get right into it. So, on the last episode, we talked about a general overview of the impact that different cultures have had in fashion. And we started with things as simple and foundational as craftsmanship, how it existed across continents long before fashion was systemized the way that we see it today on runways in Paris and Milan, storefronts that we walk into and shop every day, models, stylists, seamstresses. It really did start decades ago, if not centuries ago, with things that we are going to talk a little bit about today. We also talked about what the reason was behind us even doing this series. Sharrarne came to me after she went down a rabbit hole of what dandyism really was and how it started, the impact that it had on Black culture, and then in turn, the impact that Black culture had on fashion. So today we're going to bring the conversation a little bit more home and talk about what happens when the excellence is there, when the talent is there, but the access is not. So I'll talk about myself for a second to begin. I have a brand called Zoe and Lowe. Zoe is my daughter who is 8 years old, fearless, in love with fashion, can't miss a mirror, has no idea what so many people throughout fashion history have gone through to earn their space. Anne Lowe, the Lowe part of Zoe and Lowe, is an incredible seamstress. She was a master couturier. She trained as a second or third generation dressmaker and was responsible for making the wedding gown of Jackie Kennedy. So she was the quintessential example of excellence without access. So the stories that we can tell about fashion history literally can start as far back as the 1700s and then go through every century. Anne Lowe is kind of at the center of that, but is connected to so much more history. If we decided to talk about dandyism in particular, dandyism wasn't just about style, it was about control, discipline, and identity, all through presentation. It was a style movement that emerged in the late 1700s to early 1800s. It was centered around men, and it was essentially just about how the tailoring, the grooming was a way to express your identity, your status, without saying any words. So by the 1820s, 1840s, the idea spreads and it had been tied to how much respect you got, what your social status was. And then the late 1800s, especially and particularly if we're talking about Black culture post emancipation, you see the same translation of how we're dressing, the tailoring, the presentation showing up in Black communities. And it wasn't just about trend, it was about respect and dignity. So I asked Sharon from a generational standpoint how she felt about dandyism and how she had experienced it. And it was really interesting to see that she has true memories of how much time and intention people took and put into the way that they showed up and how it really was connected. So now we're talking about 1800s, 1900s, all the way into 2000s of this one concept of how you show up mattering so much. So if dandyism was how people presented themselves. Anne Lowe represented the craftsmanship that made the presentation even possible. And she was so behind the scenes that you have to wonder what the real issue was. Why was she such a secret? It clearly wasn't how excellent or talented she was. It was the access that she had and the credit she was given. So, as we started to talk a little bit more about Anne Lowe, dandyism, of course, Dapper Dan came up. He probably is the visual that comes to your head if you think about what dandyism truly is. Um, and then I brought up other cultures because, of course, we all love our Black culture. But if you're really going to talk about fashion from a holistic perspective, you have to include other cultures. So, I found a little bit of information to share about a few other people that were really impactful, um, because Anne Lowe is not an isolated story. So Elizabeth Keckley, she was formerly enslaved. She was a dressmaker for the Lincolns. Dapper Dan, as I just mentioned, Harlem, New York, American fashion was shaping and literally, I think, invented um, luxury fashion for Black people and New York and the whole probably East Coast. I have friends that live in New York. And Dapper Dan made like a quick resurgence a few years ago. And it was everywhere from here in DC, where I'm located, to Philly, New York, just all the way, I think probably across the country. So his impact was just truly incredible. And then I found out about Guao Pei, and forgive me if I misspoke the pronunciation. Um, Couture rooted in centuries of technique from rooted in Asia. So across cultures and across time, the craftsmanship is consistent. It's only the visibility that people have been lacking. As I've been preparing for this show and the series, I've been talking to friends in the industry, people that I know, even adjacent to the industry, about how they felt about fashion history, what they knew about people who I've been talking about today, as popular as Anne Lowe, and maybe, excuse me, as popular as Dapper Dan, and then as not as well known as Elizabeth Keckley or Gualpe. Most people didn't know about it, but they're very interested. So I'm really excited to share this information and we'll never ever look at fashion the same way. So now let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum and how fashion shows up in social media. It is that is what my brand is really about. Zoe and Low is about providing a platform for independent brands, niche brands, and then being a cross point for people that are looking to buy and wear those types of brands. And could you imagine if it existed back when Ann Lowe was known as America's best kept secret? Like she would have been all over everybody at any time they could probably get their hands on something she had made. And it just makes you think. So then Bridgerton came to mind because Bridgerton is a cultural fashion movement. People have had Bridgerton parties. Queen Charlotte, who was a woman of color, right? There's a whole series built around her. And the looks that you see in the show, the styles that you see in the show. Can you imagine who's behind it, the craftsmanship? So it made me think about Anne Lowe and the dresses that she created and how even that may actually influence and be an inspiration for some of what you're seeing on TV today in Bridgerton. So before we go to commercial break, I wanted to just recap how everyone has heard people say that fashion just repeats itself, and the styles that you see walking down the street today were most likely here 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 100 years ago at this point, right? So this series is really just about craft, influence, access, recognition, and how platforms as big as Sharon's on SiriusXM or as new as mine with Zoe and Lowe are so needed for sharing stories, educating people on history, and then furthering and expanding the platform that we provide for the next up and coming designers. So stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back to talk a little bit more about fashion history and the impact that cultures have there. Welcome back to Skin Deep here on Sirius XM Radio. I am Patrice McNeill. I'm your guest host here, sitting in for Sharrarne Morton, who is our lovely host of Skin Deep. She invited me here to do this four-part series on fashion history and the impact that different cultures have had in fashion. And I am just so pleased to be here with you guys, being able to just talk about things that I love. So let's jump right back into this. And I found it fascinating and a little bit intoxicating to kind of jump from the juxtaposition of history to present. So let's do that a little bit. And I am looking down because I took a lot of time and intention into writing this stuff out for you guys. So here we go. So 1700s, before dandyism, there was European fashion. It was very ornate, very decorative, aristocratic. Clothing was used for wealth and, quite honestly, in excess. They would wear dresses one time. It was fabric that was sourced for that dress, and then you wouldn't dare be seen in it again. Today, it shows up as maximalist fashion. Luxury brands, logos. You can't wear something twice for more than a calendar year. You might keep it, or it becomes, there's so many brands nowadays that kind of like recirculate pieces, if you will, all the different types. Fashion is visibly wealth and status. So next, dandyism begins in the late 1700s. Beau Brummel, we're shifting to really clean tailoring. We're talking about precision. We are in a more of a simplistic styling space where it's not over the top corsets and gowns and 5 and 6 piece suits. It's just about sharp tailoring, minimalist luxury, and quiet luxury trends. Now let's jump into dandyism being established. We're in the 1820s to 1840s now. Tailoring has now become tied to respectability, class, mobility, social positioning. And how it shows up today is, think about it, corporate environments, entrepreneurs, wealthy, successful people. You're seeing power suits, you're seeing dressing for success, you're seeing name brands, you're seeing new designers, you're seeing runway. Fashion is literally a tool for access and a way to influence how you're perceived by people in the room. Black culture evolution. We cannot not talk about this. This was truly Sharon's favorite topic. As we talk through everything, we're like, yep, Black culture's there. Yep, Black culture's there. Look at how we've influenced that. And so mid to late 1800s, that early, we were making an impression. This is post emancipation. Tailoring was connected to dignity, self definition, and resistance. We were showing up in streetwear, black dandyism, really beautifully tailored um, suiting, colors, getting creative with how we showed up in rooms and being bold about how we did it as well. Fashion was truly identity, pride, and visibility. And now enter Anne Lowe, my favorite. We're in the 1920s to 1960s now. Couture craftsmanship at its highest levels. We were designing and providing for elite families, and we're showing up today. Luxury fashion houses, coutures, ateliers, bridal design, which also raises the question, who is actually being credited and are they being credited even today? I couldn't help but wonder, like, what's actually going on. So between something being drawn out on the table, on the pad, whatever it is, where the idea, the ideation is coming from, to where you see the finished product, there's a lot of room in between those 2 points on the timeline even today. So next, the modern reflection. We're in the 1980s now to now. This is where we enter Dapper Dan and the cultural influence on reshaping what luxury was. Because if you know about Dapper Dan, what he was doing was taking Vuitton and like turning it into something that was a little more like streetwear, but still had the brands, the luxury brand names on it. So you couldn't deny that it was what it was, but he had taken it and made it his own, and people loved it. How's it showing up today? Collaborations, look at Pharrell, cultural influence, driving luxury, social media visibility, and people are creating powerful name brands that are all over. It's accessible to everybody now. The next show, I'm not going to ruin this for everybody, but we're going to talk about some new designers and how they made their way and how incredibly impactful social media has been as a gateway for new designers to come on and share with the world, become famous. And then also the opposite side of that, because oftentimes fashion is one of those industries where sometimes entrepreneurs and brands go to fail. So we'll get into all of that a little bit in the next two shows, and I'm really excited about it. Okay, so now I've been your tour guide through fashion history for this series, and we've talked about Europe, we've talked about Asian influence, we've talked about African American culture and influence, and we've talked about modern day flow and function of fashion. So to wrap it up, you see this evolution from ornate European fashion to dandyism and tailored precision to Black communities using style as a way to dignify themselves. And then into designers like Anne Lowe creating it at the highest level. And today we still see all of that showing up exactly the way that designers want it to. Quiet luxury, power dressing, cultural influence, you really can't talk about fashion. There's so many names that we could bring into the conversation, but another one of my favorites is Virgil Abloh. So he moved from the margins of fashion into the center of luxury. It reminds us that the story is always evolving. The visibility is expanding, the access is shifting, the foundation was always there. And if we look for it and allow ourselves to receive it, it always will be there. And you can't move only from a place of anger and hurt and disappointment for what those that are the standard, the shoulders that we stand on. You have to just come from a place of gratitude and abundance, knowing that there are so many and they're still happening today. When we understand that, we don't just see fashion, we see it differently, we respect it differently, and now we are setting the path, clearing the way, building platforms for the next part of history that we're creating every day. So I am so grateful to have shared this information with you all today. Thank you all so much for hanging with me for this episode. I'm really excited about what we have to share coming up. You can find out more about Zoe and Lowe across all social platforms at Zoe and Lowe, ZoeAndLowe, and Sirius XM Radio. This is Skin Deep. My name is Patrice McNeill. I have been your guest host, sitting in for Sharrarne Morton today. And thank you all so much.